Hello, this is George Mann and you're listening to JediCast. Ride the Storm.
R2, wir empfangen eine Übertragung. Eine neue Ausgabe des JediCast? Leite sie sofort über alle Kanäle an die Rebellenflotte weiter.
We're here at Comic Con Germany with Mr. George Mann. Good
Hello,
morning.
nice to see you.
Yeah, and for the others, I hope it's nice to hear us. We're also here with
Ines, hello.
So it's the second day of Comic Con. Apologies if our voices aren't what they used to be, but yeah, George, how have you been liking Comic Con so far here in Stuttgart?
I'm having a great time, really thoroughly enjoying myself. It's been amazing to talk to so many fans. So many people have brought books along to get signed or dressed in amazing cosplay and come to show, you know, the characters that they've from the High Republic, particularly, that they've dressed as. Everyone's been very welcoming. So yeah, voice is a little shot like you. Wrist is a little sore from signing, but all good.
Perfect. So let's start with some questions about Star Wars in general.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how did you come to be a Star Wars fan?
Wow, yeah. So I think it started about the age of 4. So my grandfather used to take me to the cinema quite a lot when I was a kid. And we had this little cinema in Darlington. And I saw loads of great films with him, things like The Dark Crystal and Search for Spock. And, you know, anything like that, he would take me along to watch. And Empire Strikes Back was one of the first films I saw at the cinema. And from that point on, I was obsessed with R2-D2. It became, like, you know, I think perfectly for that age is a character you can latch onto. And my dad also liked Star Wars a lot. So he started buying me the action figures, the sticker books, so the Panini sticker books. Yeah. And I think, you know, he used to come home sometimes with like a whole box of stickers and we'd sit and go through it for hours and fill the book in. And then my one of my cousins was into Star Wars as well, so he used to come round with his toys and we'd set up and go like round the sofa playing with all our Star Wars toys. So it was from a very young age, and then I kind of got into reading the comics.
The Marvel ones back in the day.
The Marvel ones, because we had Marvel UK back in those days, and they used to reprint them.
Yeah, even had some exclusive stories back in the day, I think.
That's right, yeah. Although, to me, that was Star Wars, you know, between the films. And I've never looked back, to be honest.
All right, that's amazing. So you said you're an R2-D2 fan. Have you ever met Kenny Baker or before he passed?
I didn't know, unfortunately.
Well, you've met Jimmy Wee, I think.
Yeah, I've met Jimmy, yeah.
All right,
yeah.
At least then. Okay, so and you said how you were introduced to Star Trek and, you know, all of these Star Wars, all these franchises and big movies of your time then, yeah. And you've also become involved in many prominent franchises like Doctor Who, Warhammer as well, right? So comparing all of what you've written for and what you enjoy, what especially do you like in Star Wars? But also what could it maybe learn from the other franchises?
Wow, that's a good question. So I only work with franchises that I actually feel like I have a genuine interest in, or that I feel I can add something to it. So, you know, it's difficult as a freelancer because, you know, when people bring you work, you want to say yes. Sure. But at the same time, I always feel, you know, I never want to do anything cynically. So I always want to approach it from the point of view of, have I got something valuable to say? Could I tell a story that's worth something? It's not just filling in the gaps between this point and that point in the story.
So something you'd like as a fan as well, then.
Yeah, exactly that. Something, yeah. I like to feel like, and this is particularly true of both Star Wars and Doctor Who, I feel like a franchise that's given me so much over the years, it's nice to give something back to the fans and you know, people who are just like me, you know. So Star Wars, I think, it's very similar to Doctor Who in a lot of ways. It's a fantasy in space. It's mythology. It's about found family at its core. And so is Doctor Who. And although the mechanism of telling the story is very different, actually those core concepts are very, very important to both franchises. I think Star Wars, I mean, it's difficult because it's done so much over such a long period to say, you know, what could it learn? It's done a lot of things. What I'd love to see more of in Star Wars is is more of the type of thing we've been doing with the High Republic, which is opening up new eras and exploring new parts of the galaxy.
We're with you there.
So, I mean, that would be my dream as a fan, to see more of that sort of stuff, because I think it opens up new opportunities for storytelling and new ways of exploring Star Wars that are still Star Wars. I think that's the important thing about writing for a franchise, is you have to get the tone right more than anything else. It has to feel like a Star Wars story, but maybe opening up some of the galaxy and some of the different periods in time allow for you to explore stories in a different way.
Yeah, you've not only written in different kinds of franchises, but also in different kinds of media, comics, novels, short stories, and even audio originals. So can you tell us a little bit about what is different in the writing process for these different kinds of media, and are there specific challenges maybe to these different?
Yeah, I mean, they're all quite different in their own way, and I love the diversity of being able to write in different mediums, and I've been very lucky that way, and for different age groups as well. Fiction is quite a personal, like novels and prose are quite a personal experience. It's you and a keyboard, essentially, and although something like the High Republic, where you're part of a writing team, you have input from other people, the process of writing the book is still very much you, and what ends up on the page tends to be a reflection of what you intended it to be, hopefully. The other mediums are a lot more collaborative in different ways. So if you're writing comics, for example, you're not writing, and this was a thing I had to learn actually when I started writing comics. You don't write you're not writing the script for the reader, you're writing the script for the artist. And then, the only bit that actually survives from your script to the end is the dialogue. And even then, it probably changes because the artist won't interpret your things in exactly the right way. Or say the right way, they'll interpret it in a better way because they're the visual person. And then you go back.
So there's multiple creatives.
Multiple creatives. It's very collaborative, and that's the part of the joy of it. And the audio is the same in that it's the same story, but you're writing the script for the cast, and they're going to interpret it, and they're going to put their spin on the characters. But there are differences between them in terms of how you approach them. So, and it's, with comics, you don't write the action, you write a series of stills. So you don't show the punch, you show the fist going back and you show the person reeling, whereas like on a screen, you'd show the punch. And then, and I like to try and write for the medium I'm working in. So again, with audio, you're thinking about what's the listener's experience going to be. So for example, I just recently did an audio called Seeds of Starlight for the High Republic. And I gave the main character has had an accident, he's got a vocoder, and that was purposeful to be able to give him a different texture on the audio production, so you'd hear something different as a listener.
Was that character Cam specifically created with the idea of the audiobook?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the conversations we'd had early on was that Audible wanted to have an exclusive Jedi character, so Cam debuts in those stories. Originally, it was going to be Cam and his master Eve, but then in the writing of Tears of the Nameless, Eve ended up going back and telling some of her backstory in that as well. But Cam, was designed for the audio. So I think that's the thing I always try and do, is think about what's the end experience going to be. With comics, one of the things I love to do is to try and throw challenges and hopefully enjoyable things to the artists, like designing spreads that do strange things with the art, like a car chase through the white spaces of the panels, or
something that breaks the normal bit.
Then. Something that you could only do in a comic book. And I think there's something coming up in Echoes of Fear 4.
All right,
where we've done that on purpose. We've kind of gone, okay, this is a type of thing you could only do in a comic book, so let's do it. Let's make use of the medium.
Yeah, I love it when authors do that as well. I find it interesting how you just said that you writing these different types of mediums for different audiences, like be it other creators or actually a reader or end consumer, if you want to be very technical about it. Now, the scripts for the audio dramas or audio originals like Battle of Jedha, they're also being printed and sold to the end consumer, to the readers, right? How do you then feel about that when suddenly the audience shifts a bit between the audio release and the print release?
It's interesting. And so, so the scripts were written for the audio production, and, there were certain notes in there that you take out for print that were, just a few odds and sods that don't really kind of
interesting
make sense. They're more like out of world direction that you might give to someone. But I also think it's great, particularly in the case of audio originals, for a print edition to be there for people, particularly for people who can't get on with audio, or for deaf people.
For accessibility
reasons, I think it's great that the scripts exist.
Yeah. Be lovely to have them on day one.
Yeah.
That's not directed at you. That's Mike, if you're listening. Oh, well. All right.
I actually think they should come with a list of character names, because I think it's always so annoying if you hear the name of a character and you don't know what it's spelled like.
Right.
I can't live with that.
I mean, I know, probably there are different kinds of readers and listeners. Like, I think we are the sort of type who like to imagine the words as we hear them as well, and want to know what they're spelled like. So it's just to get a grasp on the term, right? Yeah. And how we could reproduce the sounds, basically, by knowing what it's spelled. All right, that's just
maybe it's just a me thing.
I love that they've done, like, for Tempest Break and now for Caverns, that they've released like this cast list with the character names. That helps a lot.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Okay. So, of course, of all of these media that you've written, many of them you've also written for Star Wars: The High Republic, right? So you joined for the second phase, right?
Yeah.
How difficult was it to join a project that had already been set in motion, and you're just coming along for the ride later on?
I was very lucky in the sense, Mike always, I was writing Star Wars anyway because of myths and fables, and Mike always knew that me and Cav were best mates, so he kind of knew that there was an NDA between us, so that we could. He knew that that Cav was telling me what they were doing, and that was an open book. That wasn't he wasn't telling me secrets. It was stuff that Mike knew that was going on, and I think from an early point, Mike already had in mind that I'd be joining the team. So I ended up doing some bits for Phase 1. So I wrote 2 picture flats, which were kids books that took place during the course of those adult novels, and the Drenge short story and the Stellan short story and Life Day Treasury. So Mike, from a fairly early point, he was giving me, this is the information that we've already generated. Keep reading. It's going to become useful to you. So it flagged probably a year before I actually started on the Phase 2 project that I knew that I was going to be joining the team. So
you're being basically already being like prepared or groomed for it.
Prepared for it, definitely. Yeah. Which was great, So yeah, while I didn't have I wasn't part of the discussions of the initial Phase 1 and the setup of everything. I wasn't one of the architects. Everyone embraced me as soon as I kind of came onto the team, which they were genuinely great about it, and it was too big a project for 5 people anyway. They knew that, and we had those conversations. They said we couldn't possibly have written everything anyway, and allowed me to then bring ideas to the table and help shape what was happening next.
So yeah, what were then some of the maybe earliest ideas that you brought to the table that maybe changed some of the directions as well?
Well, I think the overall direction of the whole series, not necessarily the details of how it happened, but the overall plan for the 5-year plan was pretty much set from that point, because they'd been through the original process of going, right, okay, it's going to be a 3-phase thing. But I think what I brought to it is some of the how are we going to get from here to there? How are we going to, what's the journey of some of these characters? And, I think Phase 2, I think I wrote the first scripts of Phase 2, which were the Nameless Terror, actually, and the first novel of Phase 2, Quest of the Hidden City. So I was starting to kind of really delve into who the Pathfinders are and creating characters that would then later have resonance for other parts of the story. And then the same with Phase 3, really, helping work out, okay, where's everyone at a year after, after the storm wall's gone up and Starlight Beacon has fallen, and helping work out the characters' trajectories, and how we get them from where they are, where they were, to where they're going to be at the end. So yeah, I think, and things like, for those who've read Tears of the Nameless, things like the Ptolemites and that kind of backstory, and that whole idea that this has happened before in the universe, and that it has been contained before. So to give the Jedi some hope, that was all stuff that just came out of me working on that book in particular, and going, okay, I think, I wanted to make Reith's discoveries feel relevant.
Speaking of the Ptolemites, then, so these were entirely your creation, or was there something about them already had something already been created about them before you?
No, that was all part of the creation of Tears of the Nameless. So again, what I knew going into that book was that it was going to be the story of Wreath figuring out some of what was going on. So we had it had to be the book that kind of sold that maybe the Nameless are victims here too, and the rest was how I went about that. Well, then was up to me to kind of put together and plan. And the Ptolemites was my solution to it. And thankfully, Story Group were happy with it, and we were able to run with it.
So speaking of Tears of the Nameless, in the novel's acknowledgements, you also mentioned that Wreath's journey is a link to your personal health crisis you had.
Yeah.
Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it was not long after Celebration last year. I had a little health hiccup, and as part of kind of working out, we thought I'd had a mini stroke, and it actually turned out it was a massive spike in blood pressure that had caused, and so we managed to get my blood pressure under control, and that resolved. But in the process of working that out, they did some MRI scans and found that I had a lesion in my brain. So I had a very uncertain year, really, with lots of scans, lots of conversations and tests with doctors talking about, it was either going to be perfectly fine and it's benign and it's been there for years, or I had 7 or 8 years to live, and trying to figure out what was what.
Oh, no.
Yeah, then that was pretty much what I was told, and thankfully it turned out to be benign, but it took about a year to figure that out, because you can't get an instant solution to it because you have to monitor it. So we had to wait certain periods of time, do another scan, and then check the difference to see whether the lesion had changed. So there's no quick answer, but yeah, I mean, touch wood, it hasn't changed. So they think it's probably been there for a very long time, and it probably stopped growing when I stopped growing. So
for all those listening who are worried now, you're fine?
I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm absolutely fine. But what it did was it gave me a big period of uncertainty, where of course I was worried about what was going to happen, trying to process what was going to happen. And
obviously.
Yeah. And I was writing this book at the time.
Tears of the Nameless.
Tears of the Nameless, yeah. And Lucasfilm were brilliant because they found extra time for me, which is difficult on a project like this because the books have to come out in the right order to tell the story, because it's serialized storytelling. But they were great. I mean, they were like, just don't worry about the deadline. Just do what you can. And there were certain days where I was
lovely. Actually.
Yeah, it was great. And I know they were panicking behind the scenes. I know they were.
Obviously, you were as well, so that's fair.
Yeah.
I think.
But there were some days where I sat and just tapped out a few words, and that was all I could get done. And there were other days where I was writing fine, and what I realized, I wrote the book and then delivered it before Christmas. And what I realized in the process, kind of when I came back to the book with their notes, that it had been quite a cathartic journey, and Wreath's journey was probably a lot closer to how I'd been feeling than maybe it needed to be.
So it was a bit darker.
It was a bit darker. Yeah. He was a bit more under the influence of Aslin. So
So when you say under the influence...
Well, so in the book, Aslin is encouraging...
Spoilers, but for those listening,
obviously. Spoilers, yeah, spoilers for those listening.
Go on.
But Aslin is... He thinks that the only way to defeat the Nameless is to embrace your fear and give in to the dark side and use it as a weapon. And he sees in Wreath some of himself, and he thinks perhaps he's trying to shape Wreath into what he believes is going to be a weapon against the Nameless. So he's telling him to embrace your fear, because that'll help. I can make you stronger. I can make you succeed where I didn't succeed.
And he did in the first.
And in the first pass, more so. I mean, Wreath always came back from it, but there was a moment in the first draft where Wreath used the dark side. He embraced his fear to defeat the Nameless, because to save Amadeo. And it just went too far, actually. Because what happened, the end result was the same, was that Wreath came back and went, no, I've realized there's a different way to embrace your fear, and that's to acknowledge it and accept it and move past it. like a Jedi would. And that and what I'd realized had happened, Reith had gone too far for that realization. If you see what I mean, he needed to realize it earlier and not do the thing.
Make him even stronger by not having him go there.
Exactly,
yeah, right.
Exactly. So I then scaled back how dark Reith's journey had become, and tried to put more of where, shape it to where I wanted it to be. And I think I'm happier with the end result. But that was part of that kind of cathartic process of writing the book for me.
That's actually pretty interesting to hear.
Thank
Insights into the writing process.
No problem,
yeah. So you also said in the acknowledgements that you introduced some more lighthearted elements into the book because you noticed it was becoming too dark. Which were some of these elements that you then introduced later in the process? Yeah,
exactly that. So more stuff with the crew of the vessel. Because
some banter,
and exactly. Yeah, exactly.
The rock that the High Republic is built on.
I think in the first pass, Amadeo's journey was obviously, again, more spoilers, but he loses his master during the book, and that's pretty bleak. And I think that was making his journey too similar to Reith's in a lot of ways, where there was a bit where I realized halfway through the book, the two main characters were really low. Both of them were really low. And I was like, okay, I pushed that too far. So what I wanted to do was, again, go back to the earlier parts of the book and bring Amadeo's character out a bit more, make him a bit more fun and, an adventuring type. And obviously he still goes through the trauma of losing his master, but as
so many Jedi do.
As so many Jedi do, exactly. And handles it more like a Jedi, So yeah, so it was about more separation between the characters as well. And introducing more Amadeo and Miro having more of a kind of fun relationship.
Yeah, and speaking of masters and traumatizing events, I think we need to talk about Eve Bayer, who you've mentioned before, as having created her for Seeds of Starlight, and then brought her back into Tears of the Nameless. How did that shake out? Was it also a part of your rewrite then?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was part of the rewrite process. So after writing the first draft of Tears of the Nameless, I then wrote the first draft of Seeds of Starlight. And then when we came back to the redrafts of Tears of the Nameless, which is just part of the process with Star Wars books, you're always...
There's no conspiracy here, folks.
No. It's part of the... Especially with the High Republic book, because you're working out how to set up things for the people who are writing the next books and getting feedback from people who are writing the comics.
Editing is just part of
It's part of the process. Yeah. And one of the things we wanted to do was bolster Sicarus's role,
the antagonist,
in the book. So I thought, well, if that's the case, if he's a Jedi hunter, he has to catch some Jedi, and I had him, chasing Comac, chasing the guy Reith and Amadeo and Comac, later, but we needed to see him do something successful rather than always losing and
a good villain, an efficient villain needs to be threatening, and then he's threatening by being successful.
So it seemed obvious then to, okay, let's bring in some Jedi for him to capture. And I can't remember whether it was myself or Mike, but on a call we were brainstorming and we went, it's got to be Eve, doesn't it? Because we've talked about her having recently lost her Padawan, and let's tell that story. I guess because the books came out almost on top of each other, it looks like Eve's had a lot of trauma in a very short space of time.
She gets chewed up by the Nameless and Bulan and his minions, right? And then suddenly the Drengi are up in her brain somewhere.
Is she all right?
Yeah, she's fine. She's fine.
Are you sure? Have you checked?
Well, fine is fine. I mean, depends on your perspective. She's alive, and so's
that's a difference. I'm not sure if you've noticed.
It's no secret that there's a second part to Seeds of Starlight. There's another story to come next year, and Eve will be back. Yeah, I mean, I think she's been through the worst of it. Let's put it that way. There's
so
trials
no more torture for Master Bayer?
Not necessarily for Eve, maybe for some of the others.
Well, that's reassuring. Okay, it's great that we can laugh about it.
So you've also written a lot of legends books, like dark legends and myths and fables and stuff like that. And in Tears of the Nameless, Reith actually goes to research some legends. And at one point, the book says the myths and fables of the Jedi archives. He's looking that up. So we were all thinking he would come across some of the myths and fables you have written. Did this idea ever come up?
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's exactly a reference to that. That's the idea that it's a hint for people. It's an Easter egg sort of thing. So people who know that book will imagine that Reith's reading some of those stories. That was exactly the hint. And I remember I put it in, and I remember the notes came back, and there was a little note from Pablo Hidalgo just said, "I see what you did there," with a little wink.
Yeah, that was like, I think we had the same reaction as Pablo did.
So that was, but it was just a fun little thing to do because, of course, that's the type of story that Reith would be researching. And then in Echoes of Fear, we see one of those stories with the Darth Ravi story, and we purposely framed that story to be like one of the Dark Legend stories to give that resonance.
Yeah. And speaking of darkness and, what you've shared about your writing process then for Tears of the Nameless, Aslan Rel, he's this sort of tragic as well as dangerous, enigmatic character. Like, how difficult was it then to write him? Can you tell us a bit about
it? He's a joy to write. I mean,
a joy.
An absolute joy to write. He's a gift of a character. And
why?
Why? Because he's so complex, and you can give him such kind of pathos and gravitas in a scene.
He can toy with the others.
He can toy with the others, and he's got that kind of knowing superiority about him. But there's also that lovely thing about he exists in this world where is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? You don't really know. I mean, is he a bad guy whose kind of agenda just happens to be aligned with the Jedi at this moment, or does he really care about the Jedi? And is what he's saying true? Is it a case of, I did this for you. This is a sacrifice that I made to protect the Jedi, to protect the Jedi Order. I've given into the dark side because it's the only way to defeat the Nameless. And I've made that sacrifice.
And the answer's always more complex than yes or no to those questions.
Exactly. And that's how I always try to write characters like that. So, with Markian Rowe in Eye of Darkness, I really try to kind of show some of the grey area, from Markian's perspective. Of course, he's the hero. He doesn't see himself as the villain. And to show, he might be a madman in a lot of ways, but also he's very clever. And in that book, in Eye of Darkness, he's lost because he's won. That's the whole point.
Sort of defeated himself.
So he defeated himself because that's that. And Gira gives voice to that when she says, "Look, we now have to put a government in. We now have to put a control system in." And
he just wanted to plunder.
No, I don't. He just wants to be a part. He wants to be. He's a chaos engine. He
That's a good way of describing him.
Yeah. So to him, I think that was the scene in that book where that book unlocked for me when I wrote that scene, and he says to Gira, "No, that's what the Jedi haven't realized, that to win you have to become your enemy." And that's what's happened to me.
He has to impose order on a government suddenly.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly he's just replacing the Republic with something else, and it's like that's not what I'm in this for. And I think for me, Aslan's in the same kind of same sort of character where I want to write the grey areas in, where actually, maybe he really does care about the outcome here, and maybe he really does care about Reith. He thinks the best thing for Reith is to say to him, embrace your fear. You have to,
to become like him.
Because you'll survive if you do that. And it takes a lot of strength from Reith to realize that's not true.
So now we've actually started talking about Eye of Darkness already.
Yeah.
So there was one specific scene that we, of course, all remember. That was when Grandmaster Pratri Vita was publicly executed.
Yeah.
How did you decide that he was going to be killed off, or was that your decision, or was it already set?
So that's a really interesting example of the writing team working together, and Mike's input as well, because. So I knew at that point I wanted to show Markian Rowe executing a Jedi Master with the Nameless. I think it was, and broadcasting it. It was like that was something that I always had in mind for the book, because it was him showing his strength and the weakness of the Jedi,
and being chaotic,
and yeah, exactly that. So I had that scene in mind. In fact, I wrote that scene, but it was a different Jedi. It was just a
random one?
A new one I'd created.
All right.
Whose name now is in... When Elzar goes up against the storm wall and loads of Jedi die, there's one Jedi who's mentioned who you've probably never heard of before at that point.
We'll have to go back for that.
That was the name of the Jedi that I'd originally created for this. But of course, it doesn't have the same pathos if it's just a Jedi you've just met.
It has more impact if it's a familiar character.
So when we then talked about it, I said, I can't remember who. I think it was probably Mikey, but it might have been one of the others who said, "No, let's make it Pro-Tre Vita. Let's do something. If we're going to do this, let's lean into it and make it even bigger and make it a council Grandmaster. Yeah. And of course, that was a brilliant opportunity to just escalate everything. It was a great example of that teamwork.
I also like it when the media and its influence is mentioned in Star Wars too. Was that also your decision to make it like something that is broadcast, something that everybody can access publicly?
And bringing in real diros?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was. I honestly can't remember how the discussions about Rill worked, but I think we'd had discussions about where was Rill, I think, and I think it was my call to put her in the camp because thinking about it, actually, yes, it was because I wanted her to be like P.G. Wodehouse in during the Second World War. I don't know if you know the story of P.G. Wodehouse. So
maybe give us a brief summary.
So obviously he's the guy who created Jeeves and Wooster, famous British writer, and during the Second World War, he was forced to broadcast he was captured and forced to broadcast propaganda.
Oh, right, okay.
And
he put in like sneaky messages then, or something like that.
No, well, I don't. I mean, to be honest, I haven't researched that so much. I don't know, but I know there was a lot of kind of questioning of, does he really believe this? Right. Is he a quisling? Is he
toying with the party lines?
Yeah. And so I kind of thought, again, this is a great setup for Rill. She's trapped and being forced to broadcast enemy propaganda, but obviously, in the true spirit of Star Wars, she's a rebel, and working against them. So yeah, that was part of the plan, and obviously she ends up staying with the Ugnaught, and then the story is picked up by Lydia.
The project, the execution scene also harkens back, I think, to the central question of the project, right? So, what scares a Jedi?
Yeah.
For the first time, they saw what was scaring them, what was killing them, right?
Yeah.
Because the effect doesn't translate through the holo recording, right? So, what scares a Jedi, of course, is a nuanced question, and it's present in both of your Phase 3 novels, right?
Yeah.
The Nameless are the obvious answer, maybe, to that. Maybe there's more to what scares a Jedi. How do you view that?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, broad question, isn't it? And I think that you're right. It's something I've tried to explore in both the books. I mean, you're right. The obvious answer is the Nameless. That's a physical manifestation of that fear.
Yeah, it's easy to point out the monster, right?
Yeah. But there's a lot more to it, isn't there? I suspect failure might be an answer that scares them.
As an order, as an
order, as a collective. I mean, and as individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're taught that failure is the Force moves in mysterious ways and all of that, and they're not expected to beat themselves up, but they do. Of course, they're humans or people in lots of ways that like us, and although they have a belief system that gives them a certain element of support and structure to their existence, they're still people, and they still have the kind of emotive situations that we do as well. And I mean, it's manifest in Elzar, particularly in Eye of Darkness. He becomes almost obsessive. It becomes almost obsessive. He's desperate to get Avar back. He thinks he's driven her away. He obviously made a terrible mistake at the end of Fallen Star. He's trying to learn to live with the consequences of that, and stop trusting himself. And then, poor old Elzar, he finally kind of goes, okay, what we need to do is we need to make this big assault on the storm wall. It's what's going to make the difference. And he finally wins that support, and then it all goes horribly wrong. And he just keeps failing.
Keeps throwing himself at that wall or others. And
and it's because, really, what he's trying to do is he's trying to be Stellan rather than letting himself be Elzar. That's exactly it. So that's about trusting himself. So I think, if the question of what scares Elzar, I think is probably Elzar scares Elzar, being himself at that point. And he needs in that book, he's trying to learn to become himself again. Ava has a different thing. Ava has stopped trusting herself as well, and she thinks she's tried to revert to a previous version of herself, which is, I can do it all myself. I'm strong enough. I can all the little bits I'm doing will add up to something big. And what she actually really needs to do is recognize that she needs to ask for help and be part of a team again. So there's all these lessons that the Jedi are trying to learn, particularly in that book. And I think, that answer applies to them there as well. What scares the Jedi? Well, often it's the mirror.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that in the High Republic, for the first time, we see Jedi actually asking for help. I think this is something that hasn't been coming up.
Seeing like the heroes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, so, the High Republic are meant to be the Jedi at their height. That doesn't mean that they're superpowers. It actually means that they understand that asking for help and being honest and open about how they feel about things is a strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in Tears of the Nameless especially, I think it really stood out to me that there were so many positive examples, although it was so dark, as you mentioned, there were so many positive examples of Jedi using the Jedi philosophy to deal with crises. So, for example, we had this Jedi who was savoring every moment of his life consciously, or we had talking about your feelings to process them, taking a leap of faith and things like that to deal with crises and difficult situations in life, so that in the end the book felt like it had a message of hope after all.
Yeah.
How important was this message of hope to you?
Huge. It was huge. I mean, for me, it's the core of Star Wars. That's what Star Wars is. Star Wars is about a new hope. Exactly that. Yeah. It's about finding hope, and often finding hope in found family, and kind of the book's is a lot about found family as well. Really, I mean, you can't really equate a master and apprentice as a parental relationship, but there are some similarities to it.
It's still there.
There's still some similarities to it. And really, there's a lot of Tears of the Nameless, which is about father and son relationships. You've got Miro and Amadeo, you've got Comac and Reath, but also Aslin and Reath, and Aslin being almost like a replacement for Comac,
and then Reath and Amadeo being like siblings.
Exactly that. Well, exactly that. Right. You've got the character of Dorian talks about his father. So that was a big part of it for me as well, which is showing those relationships, and the hope that Comac coming back is a moment of hope. And
that also has some tragic implications as well, though, for Reath, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot for Reath. Reath has to deal with it, has to process it. But by the end, those two, there's that final scene with the two of them where it's almost like help me, Dad, sort of thing.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, and I think again, thinking about the journey that I was on at the time writing the books, I was looking for hope as well, of course. So it's mining for it in that story. It helped me a lot.
Yeah, so therapeutic writing in that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you mentioned Dorian, right? Who's I think an important character to many people, and I think yourself as well. Can you tell us a little bit about his creation?
Yeah. So one of my sons is trans, and I really, really wanted to represent for him someone in Star Wars who was a trans man, and so. That's basically why I created Dorian, to have that character, to give voice to that experience in the Star Wars universe. And yes, some of the other writers have created trans and non-binary characters as well. We tried really hard to ensure that everyone can see themselves in the High Republic, because we are all the Republic. We mean that when we say it. We want everyone to see themselves in the High Republic. Yeah. And for me, it was again, because I felt I was writing a book thematically that was about fathers and sons. I wanted to write about that situation, and Elliot was brilliant. I when I wrote that scene where Dorian explains to Amadeo about his relationship with his father and how he kind of transitioned, I asked Elliot to read it for me to make sure, is this true? Am I writing this authentically? And he said, yeah, that's great. Please do put it in the book. It works.
It does, I think. I mean, not being trans, of course, but like, to me, really illustrated how important it is to acknowledge and represent and, support trans people as well. And
I think it's hugely important. I think, Star Wars is a global phenomenon, and it has it's given us a massive platform, and I think it's incumbent on us as writers to use that platform for good. So where we can, and not at the expense of telling a good story or entertaining people.
It enhances the story.
Exactly.
I think that's a false dichotomy there.
I agree. It's again, it's Star Wars is for everyone, and I think showing a universe where everything is accepted is really useful because
it's the utopia we're striving for.
Exactly.
That's something I always think when I'm watching Star Trek, but I think it's also true here.
Yeah,
that's sort of it's a utopia, and it's an ideal place. Maybe we can get there someday.
Let's hope.
So now that you've written quite a lot of stories in the High Republic, is there any character you would like to explore more? Maybe even after the end of the project, when there more stories are going to be published.
Absolutely. I mean, there's loads of characters I'd like to revisit. Whether we get the opportunity to or not is, we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait and see. I think
Mike, if you're listening again,
I'd love to write more Wreath. I didn't create that character, but I love writing for him.
What resonates to you about him?
Oh, he loves books.
Obviously.
We liked reading him too.
I think nobody in this room here will disagree.
But I think the thing that if I was given carte blanche, what would you like to go back and do? I'd love to tell more stories about the Pathfinders. I feel like that's an opportunity. Phase 2 was a shorter phase, purposely designed to be that way, and it made sense to do it that way. But I felt that there was so much more we could do with the Pathfinders, so many more stories we could tell.
Underused in phase 2.
Exactly. We just, because they weren't germane to the core story that we were trying to tell. That was the Path of the Open Hand.
So it was sort of like the set dressing or world building accessories.
I guess so. Yeah, it's kind of it's a cool thing that the Jedi are doing in that era, but it wasn't the focus of the main thrust of the story. But I got to do it in Quest of the Hidden City, and I got to do it in The Nameless Terror, and I feel like both of those teams.
And in Echoes of Fear 3.
And Echoes of Fear 3, yeah. I mean, that's me going, there's more to do with the Pathfinders. Let's put them in Echoes of Fear.
See, they're great. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I think, so there's 3 teams there, 3 teams that, and obviously there's other teams we haven't met that I'd love to return to. I mean, Salandra and Rupert, Rock and Corran and Atticus and Jardia. So, yeah, if the universe is listening, that's what I'd like to do next.
Yeah. You just mentioned phase 2, and I think the centerpiece of that short phase that may have been was the Battle of Jedha, right? Which you explored through the audio, of course, but through the eponymous audio, the Battle of Jedha, but also through the short stories set in Enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
How did you go about, building this sort of battle? And it also appeared in other works as well by Daniel and by Cavan, right?
Yeah, and Cav in particular did a lot with the comic. Yeah, so it's kind of like the big midpoint set piece of Phase 2. This battle, it's where we learn a lot about the Path of the Open Hand and the different agendas. So I worked very closely with Cav on that, and which helps, because the fact we've written loads of stuff together before and we're good friends. So we were able to kind of sit and plot out these are the core beats of what's going to happen on Jedha during this time. This is when the statue's going to fall, and where are we going to show different bits. So Cav always had the statue falling in the comic. That was his plan. So it was like, we'll hear it go down. We'll have the people report about it in the audio, but
we'll never see Rogue One with the same eyes again.
Exactly, exactly. And things like the speech that the Herald gives, which is the turning point for the mob. I said, Cav, that was a crux point of his comic. So Cav, you write the speech, and I will put the words in the audio. But then there was another scene where Marder stabs someone, I think, that I wrote it and then gave it to Cav, and he then worked it into the book. So we worked like that. It was really close, and it was a lot of fun to do that way. And Enlightenment was Cav's as well. That he was the guy who came up with Enlightenment and Craden and the 2 sisters who work at the door. And then what I did with Enlightenment was, and I think for me, actually, Tales of Enlightenment the short stories are probably my favorite part of my writing for Phase 2. I created some regulars for it, so that the characters who sit at the bar and tell other stories, and Keth was my character.
Yeah.
And
I think that the plot twists in Battle of Jedha hit better because of the short stories as well.
Yeah, I think they inform each other, and I feel like it got some good emotional beats out of a very short word count in some of those stories. So I wanted to make it like Cheers, the TV series. It's like a cast of regulars, and someone new comes into the bar every week, and they end up telling a story or getting involved in a story, and then one day Keth's just not there, and it's like, and we know from the Battle of Jedha why. I think that was kind of another good example of writers working together to build something better.
Sure, yeah. So there were a lot of eccentric characters in there as well, right? Certainly, but do you have any like favorites?
Keth particularly. That was a great note from when I first started talking to Tom, the editor, Tom Holer at Random House, about the Battle of Jedha. He gave me a really great note from the very offset before when we first talked about this is the rough beats of the story, rough shape of the story. He said, the tricky bit you've got here, George, is it's a middle book that everyone is going to pass through this story. All the Jedi are going to pass through this story. Keth is the only one who's this is his one bit of time on screen. This is his story. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's a really good note, because then I have to really put pathos into Keth's story. So he's a favourite. The other thing that came out of writing those stories that I really loved was the Brotherhood of the Ninth Door, the kind of the dark side order that are a bit. They're not Sith. That they use a bit of light side and a bit of dark side. And although that some of them are out and out bad guys, some of them are. You see them helping during the Battle of Jedha. They're helping the civilians, and they're a faction that I've gone on to explore in the Qui-Gon graphic novel that's coming out next year.
Maybe just as the last question surrounding High Republic, then especially with Battle of Jedha, you had this one plot line that unfolded across different books and comics that it still had to fit, had to have this emotional through line through it all. How do you then coordinate it so that every book feels complete without having the complete event in it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard, and that's what the rewrites often are for. It's hard to it kind of snaps into focus when you've got everything. So when all the authors have written a first draft of what they're doing, you can go, actually, it would be better if this beat played out fully in my story, but this beat played out fully in your story,
or in both,
or in both. Yeah, to add that completion. And you use tricks like Keth. That's a great example of, that's a complete story arc of a character who gets to be the thing he always wanted to be. Okay, he dies in the process. That's Star Wars.
Small process
in the High Republic.
but actually, while his death is sad, it's a fulfillment story. It's actually, it's a story of becoming. And so you try and make sure there are stories like that have complete arcs. So you feel like there are endpoints within the individual book.
So wrapping this up, which projects are you working on at the moment, Star Wars or otherwise? Is there anything you can talk about already?
Yeah, or what's coming up then?
Yeah, there's not a lot I can talk about. Obviously it's been announced there's a second part to Seeds of Starlight. I can't really talk about what that is, but it's,
And we won't.
That's coming next year. There's the Qui-Gon graphic novel I've mentioned.
Can you say anything about it?
So it's focused. Obviously, it's a book focused on Qui-Gon. And we see him at 3 different points in his life throughout the book.
3 different. So the 3 different eras.
3 different. So you see him as a Padawan with Dooku as a Jedi. You see him as on his own as a kind of wandering Jedi, and you see him as a master with a young Obi-Wan, and younger than you see him in Phantom Menace. And there's a through thread story, and obviously I've mentioned that the Brotherhood of the Ninth Door are a factor.
So there's a High Republic connection.
Well, in that much, yeah. And then I'm trying to think. There's Echoes of Fear 4, issue 4 to come out, which completes that story. I think that's probably all I can talk about at the moment. I'm working on a couple of other projects outside of Star Wars as well at the moment.
Feel free to give him a shout out as well.
Well, again, most of them are.
Whenever you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to do some more original fiction as well. So I over the last few years, I've written a couple of fantasy novellas, that kind of dark fantasy. And so first one's called Broken Things and the second one's called Spider Glass. And I really want to explore that world. They're called Tales of Durston is the series, in a lot more detail. So my intention is to spend some time writing a big fat fantasy book as well as the first of a proper series.
Maybe one question concerning Qui-Gon. A lot of fans have said that if Qui-Gon was alive during the High Republic, then he would be a way seeker during that time. Do you agree with that statement?
I think that's probably true. I think that's a good understanding of Qui-Gon's character and what the way seekers are.
So did Qui-Gon inform the creation of the Wayseekers? Do you know anything about that? Might have been before your time on the project.
Yeah, I mean, that was before my time on the project. So, but I think he probably did. I think, I think there's that idea of, and also it's when you sit down and go, okay, these are the Jedi at their height, they're going to be accepting of different forms of being part of the Order as well. So I imagine there was a bit of a brainstorm amongst the original 5 and story group and the team to go, okay, well, what are the different roles that Jedi could fulfill in that space? But I'm sure that Qui-Gon kind of helped with that. And I think, if the Jedi had been more accepting at the time of the Phantom Menace of different kind of ways of being a part of
that's a tragedy
the Order.
of it.
Yeah, I think he would have been a way finder.
Right. So then how does it feel to have High Republic wrapping up at last?
It's bittersweet. So in a lot of ways, I'm sad that it's coming to an end, but also and that my projects for it are pretty much done. But at the same time, I'm glad because it means we're fulfilling something that we'd always planned to do. This is the story that we'd always planned to tell. It was always planned to be 5 years, 3 phases. And it's nice to finish something. I think it's a good thing sometimes to say, here's the end. And it doesn't mean it's the end of the High Republic era, but it's the end of the High Republic series.
That the story can have like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And, stick the landing then, hopefully. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no pressure, Charles.
Yeah, Charles. Trials of the luminous authors. I'm sad but happy. Like we were saying earlier, I'd love it if there was opportunity in the future to go back and fill in some gaps and tell some stories. That for sure.
That I can't imagine we won't see more of the High Republic in the future.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute no-brainer for us as well as fans. The question isn't if, but when and what, basically. Yeah,
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
So you've read Trials of the Jedi?
Not yet. I'm waiting on purpose actually because I'm not going to wait till it's published.
Do you already have like a draft lying around somewhere?
Well,
we're not going to rob you.
No. I don't have anything on me. So,
all right, good.
No, I mean obviously we all share stuff. So, but for me, because I'm not writing anything, I've written the stuff that leads into the end. I'm not writing anything concurrent with the end. I don't need to read them until they're locked and loaded. So, often it's the case that we read early versions of the books and then you end up reading the books multiple times during the course of them being rewritten.
And then you keep straight what has changed maybe when you're
sometimes writing sometimes that's a challenge. So in this case, I'm looking forward to actually reading the end as a fan.
Is there anything else maybe you want to tell our German readers or listeners, like part of this interview we'll also see print?
Just, buckle up. You're in.
Well,
I hope so.
You're in for a hell of a ride, and it's going to be fantastic.
Well, it's been fantastic having you here, George.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and thank you at home for listening. This has been Florian and Ines with George Mann at Comic Con Stuttgart 2024. Over and out. Goodbye.
Hi, this is George Mann. Thank you for listening. We are all the Republic.